Okay, great. Good morning. Let's see. Okay, I just wanted to know who we've got here. I am going to just answer questions, go through the draft of the proposed system plan for 2020. Does anybody have any questions right off the bat? Things that you'd like clarified? Whatever. I know you probably don't want to listen to me talk for a whole hour, so I'll try to keep it a little bit short. Okay, let me open up my my document. It is open, and I want to share it. And that is what I want to share. And then I share it. So you should be seeing the same thing I'm seeing now. You should be seeing the front copy. Okay, and you can see that it is to be approved in May. It's always important that it get approved because in June we present it to the State Library Advisory Board, and they are actually the final approval. I don't know that they've ever changed anything, but we have to have their final approval on everything, and that's why we do this in May. So on page 2 here, the mission and vision statement have not changed from last year. That is something that I'm hoping will be changed for next year. As we start through the strategic planning process in CKLS this year again. So this about, hi Brandon, it establishes the system, lists the statutes annotated, and the population is what we use. It's from the Kansas Certified Population from 2010 by the Census Bureau. That is what we use to determine the population or per capita allotment as well. So we need to change that right there. 2020, I see. This is why we do this. Our goals for this year are the same. We have just tightened those up just a little bit. There are our libraries. One of the things last year that had happened, because the format was so different, was that in several different places we listed who was eligible for what. We tried to really tighten that up, and that's on here page 2 and page 3, where it talks about the services that are extended to public libraries, affiliate libraries, and outlets. Because the outlets are not legally established public libraries, they're eligible for limited services. They do get rotating. They often advertise books by mail because they are in very rural areas, and they're certainly eligible to come to continuing education events. There is no CE reimbursement for them to do that. These are truly run by volunteers. The affiliate libraries would be then the prison library in Ellsworth, and the academic libraries, and the technical colleges as well, and then the school libraries. For the purposes of grants, the district, it gets one application, and they need to work together in the schools, the districts on that. Okay, so right now, with the school districts that keep being added, the public libraries that exist, we are a 95-member board when we are full. A quorum of 27 is required. Before we added school districts, we were a 54 board, and we didn't change the quorum. It was pretty difficult sometimes to get people into the quorum, to the meetings, and so we haven't changed that. Statute doesn't really say how we have to establish the quorum. Right now, the full system board meets twice a year. They approve the system plan, or this is the strategic plan, elect members to the executive board, approve the budget, any resolutions or bylaw changes. And the resolutions that we've been approving have been school districts have to petition to join the system. The system board approves them, and then it goes to the state library board to approve them after that. You can see in the comments on the right side about the twice a year highlighted. I had a number of people ask me what the other systems do, and most of the other systems meet once a year in August. They have to have that meeting in August because that's when the budget has to be approved. The budget will have been already published before then, and so we have to have that meeting, and that's what they do then. And they conduct all of their business in one meeting. In the bylaws, excuse me, the full system board delegates the day-to-day running of the system to the director and the executive board, and that's how then the other systems can just have the one meeting and still conduct business. They've been doing it for a long time, and they don't think that it's it's not difficult. It doesn't put up any barriers for them.
Gail, does
Yes.
that mean that the executive board is who approves the other library system plans because they have to give them to them in June?
No, they don't. They don't. There's none of that. I know. I thought that was weird. How would you get the system plan approved? And it doesn't need to be approved by the full board. Apparently, I'm not exactly sure how that process works.
Interesting.
But that is something that if our libraries, if our full system board, I'll just say, was interested in, that's something that we would need to investigate a little bit further and figure out what our sort of timeline on things would need to be. That would be a bylaws change, but it would also be change of procedure on our part as well.
Okay.
On page 3, right about in the middle, it talks about the executive board. And it's anywhere from 10 to 14 members, and it really kind of depends because it's the county appointees that round that out. And it used to be governor's appointees, and they were very difficult to get. And now we only have just a couple of counties that we don't have appointees for. So on the executive board, we do have 2 county appointees. We have 1 school librarian. We have positions for 2 librarians. Right now, the only public library position that is filled is the small to medium libraries. And then we have other members who have been elected to the executive board, and that was done at the business meeting. We do have 2 positions on the executive board that will be up for re-election in May. And if you have anyone on your library board that you think might be interested in serving on the executive board, please ask them about that and contact me. I will soon be sending out documentation for that. The executive board does meet monthly around the system. Their mileage is reimbursed, and we share lunch, and then we have our business meeting. Okay, the goals and objectives are basically the same. We've gone through and we've tweaked a little bit of the language. We eliminated some things that were redundant. For clarity, we reworded some things, and for clarity also we regrouped like things with like things. But in the goals and objectives, actually very little has changed. Under number 2, provide financial support to eligible member libraries in taxing counties. Lowercase f was advocacy grants. That is something new that we propose to add this year. We had a handful of librarians who wanted to go to Library Legislative Day in Topeka earlier this year, but the weather put the kibosh on that. But the advocacy grants could also be for holding events in your library, or even just to get your legislators in, or your stakeholders in your community in, so that you can brag on your library. We also offer competitive grants to eligible public libraries, school libraries, and affiliate libraries. Eligible public libraries are those libraries who are eligible for state aid and who are eligible for the basic system allotment. If a library is not eligible for those 2 things, then they're not eligible for competitive grants. One of the things also I think it's important to point out in item 2, capital letter C, review and evaluate the schedule of costs for services and support. You've probably caught on by now that we're very keen on good stewardship. We have eliminated some things that were no longer necessary, but that also means then that we may add things. That also means then that we may look at what we're offering and offer opt-out options. That is not anything that we've ever done before, and that is something that we are starting. I want to talk about that for just a minute, please. When CKLS started paying for the movie license, it was just a blanket all throughout the system. Every library got it, but we do have some libraries that have never used it, and it makes no sense for the system to use tax dollars to pay for that service if it's not going to be used. And so what I want to do is start looking at all of the services, and especially things where we throw a lot of money into it, like the movie license and Hoopla, and offer libraries the opt-out option. So I did just mention Hoopla. Hoopla is kicking off for most of the system on the 18th of March, next Monday. And for this year, we have included all libraries in the Hoopla funding because we want everybody to get a sample of another option for digital content. If their patrons like it, those libraries do need to consider adding more local funds into that pot of money for their patrons. However, if by December we see there is any library or libraries that have not used Hoopla, and I can't really put a number on usage because I'll explain that in just a minute. What I'm going to do is then go visit with those library boards and offer those library boards an opt-out option. It's not permanent, but it could be that the board in place now and the librarian in place now and the demographic or the makeup of the community, Hoopla is not right for them. On the form that I'll be drafting up, and I'll share it out with everyone, the opt-out form, it will specify that if in January a library opts out, they're not going to be able to opt in again within that same year, because that's not the way that the budget cycle works. Anything that opts out has to work with the budget cycle. I said something that I was going to get back to. I don't remember. Any questions about the opt-out options? Okay, be sure to ask away. Okay, yes.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. With the opt-out, I don't know if you said this, but if they opt out, there's no financial kickback for that. For opting
Correct.
Out. Where would that money go? Just back in the pool, back in the general fund? Where does
well,
that?
With Hoopla especially, it's going to go right. I'm going to drain the funds from that account, close that account, and then distribute them amongst the heavy users. I think it makes no sense to just leave money in an account that's not going to be used when we have a lot of libraries that are really going to use this service. With other things like the movie license, there's not going to be any financial reimbursement for it if you decide to opt out, because the libraries never put money from their own budget into the service. We have some libraries now who opt out of rotating books. That's always an option on the table, but there is no financial reimbursement for that because it's a service, it's not a grant. Does that answer your question, Brandon?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was number C, where we review and evaluate the schedule of costs. One of the things we did in previous years about reviewing and evaluating the schedule of costs is we realized that for the libraries who get their things processed through CKLS, it was cheaper for us to order those things pre-processed from Ingram than it was to pay someone to process them. The people are always the most expensive part of any organization, and we do take a look at that. Under number C, we do provide technology support for library productivity. We know that we are a very technology-driven industry now, and it is also for service to customers for member libraries. That means that we'll provide technology training. We provide consulting on hardware, software, network consulting. We're not going to go run wires in your library. We'll also help you plan and coordinate that installation. Under number E, we propose to still continue providing the technology improvement grants to public libraries. We just got a grant evaluation form from Hayes for some wireless access points, and they have access points now all throughout the gallery. And that's great because CKLS meets there often. We will evaluate and support digital content. Under the evaluate, we'll make sure that what we're putting money into is being used. That is also part of that. If you're not using it, we're not going to keep throwing money at it. We do provide funding for shared digital collections, and we do encourage libraries to do the same, to add some of their local funds towards digital content. CKLS funds fully Sunflower eLibrary, the platform, but for libraries that were on Sunflower eLibrary before the system joined, that would be Hayes, Salina, Beloit, Concordia, and Belleville. They get half of their platform fee reimbursed every year, and CKLS does purchase a lot of content. We put about $60,000 a year into Sunflower eLibrary, and the things that we put in are open and available to all CKLS libraries as well. We are at the point in the digital content phase that we as the system don't really need to go out and train librarians on how to use it. So we do point people in the direction of amazing vendor-generated training, and for print materials, for marketing, we will print those for you. Remember that at no cost to the library, CKLS will print 100 of something in color on any size, shape, or paper. So if you run out of Hoopla marketing materials, just let us know and we'll get more out to you. Any questions? Good. Number 5, we're still encouraging and supporting programming. We know that programming brings people into the library that might not otherwise come in. We support that through training and for programming materials. We also keep librarians abreast of programming trends, and we do offer grants. You can see item I here. Offer a Storytime grant to eligible public libraries is something that's new. We'll get back to that in a minute. And the programming grant, I have what I would consider to be great news on that front in just a moment. We encourage resource sharing, and the Courier falls under this, but this is also our Share It and our Interlibrary Loan. If every library does Interlibrary Loan, and if they're not able to find something, if they send that on to CKLS, we will search. We have gotten things as far away as Norway and England for library members in central Kansas. Hello, more people are here. Yay. Let's see. But what we realized when we were talking about effective and reduced costs, we realized that last year that we did not need one full-time interlibrary loan clerk. When CKLS stopped doing the interlibrary loan mostly for Great Bend and sent that upstairs, we realized that we would only need a part-time clerk. And so that was one cost-saving measure that we initiated. So if we come down to, excuse me, number E, subsidize the Kansas Library Express Courier. A and B are where we are right now. 5-day courier service costs $2,400. If you are a 5-day library, the library pays $300, and CKLS subsidizes the other through a courier allotment of $2,100. 3-day a week costs $1,050. The library pays $150, and then CKLS pays $950 of that. Now, I am on the statewide courier committee. I just sent out a courier document yesterday. Did y'all get a chance to look at that? I'm not sure if I need to send that again or not. You let me know if I do, and I will. So I'm holding it in my grimy mitt so I can make sure I get the numbers right. Over the next 3 years, the courier increase is going to go up by about 10% total. It is a stepped increase. We were able to negotiate that. Laura DeBon did that for us. The courier committee is meeting the the week after next. And at that point, we're also going to determine if there will be an increase in overage costs, overage fees. We'd like to keep that the same. The Courier is subsidized through the state, and that comes from LSTA grant, Library Services Technology Act money. We have asked legislators to boost that subsidy up at the state level, and that may help keep courier costs stable for a while again. The courier costs that you see here are not the actual true costs because of the subsidy through the state. These are the costs out to the library. On the document that I sent out, you can see that it adds up to about $6,400 if CKLS pays for those courier increases. One of the things that I had Steve also add down at the bottom here was the overage costs for libraries who have to pay overage. And overage happens if a library is doing an amazing job at resource sharing. Resource sharing is a basic tenet of a modern library. But what we know is the overage costs can go anywhere from $500 and up. CKLS pays $3,000 a year for overage, and we consider it a great bargain. And we have 2 libraries that pay $1,000, and we have 4 libraries that pay $500. Libraries have said that they're not able to absorb that cost. And so one of the things that can come out of this discussion is that we put on the ballot for the May business meeting that CKLS absorb the costs of the courier overage. I think that the way that I look at it, $64,000 is not a lot of money at the system level. At the local level, it is a significant amount of money. For some libraries, $500 is their whole collection budget for the year. And so when we talk about these things, we're not just working for the small libraries. We're really thinking about the big libraries. They have bigger collections. They lend and borrow more things. And so if out of this discussion and the next one, someone wants us to put on the ballot that CKLS subsidizes those overage costs and subsidizes the courier cost increases, we can put that on the ballot and take that to the full system board.
Gail, so you said there are 4 libraries that are $500 and 2 that are $1,000. That it would only be $4,000,
right?
According to last year's numbers.
Yes, yes, and that is as the overage charges right now, as of this moment. Like I said, we're going to discuss if we have to increase overage costs or not. Yes, so really that's a very nominal amount of money for the system, but for each library, especially the ones that are the heavy users, that helps them out a little bit. And I think that we need to be mindful of that. They have more money. They also have to do a lot more with it and for a lot more people. So it
Gail,
is. Yes.
Sorry, I also want to add that we do have, I think you already said it, that we do have several libraries that are very close to the limit. And there's been talk of like, well, when we get close, we're just going to stop blending. And so we want to we want to encourage our libraries to lend as much as they can. So
yeah, last year we were 40 over, and those 40 ended up costing us over $10 per loan. You average out that fee. Now $500 isn't a great deal for us, but when you factor in that a lot of our interlibrary loans are from patrons that are outside our city. I mean, we have 4,000 patrons outside the city of Hayes.
Right.
And, if we took all those out, we would not have went over the 20, whatever that number is.
Right.
So yeah, I have 2 thoughts on it. First, like I think we definitely need to support. I think that's something that should happen. The second thought on the overall topic is I appreciate the effort to absorb the increased cost, because from what I can see, the $300 is still the same for the libraries on what you sent out yesterday, correct?
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
This from this part here was what we're doing this year, and the yellow is where we'd be next year. And it's not a lot of money if you're looking at this document, and I'm sorry I didn't draw that up. It's not a lot of money, but it adds up to a lot of money for the smaller libraries. And the smaller libraries do have items in their collection that are borrowed frequently by larger libraries, and we want to make sure that they're able to continue freely, without risk, without additional cost, share those resources and receive those resources in as well. Because the courier count is on what goes out of your library, but if you borrow something from another library, you have to send it back. And I think that, to me, this is important that we subsidize that. And, you know, nowhere in the system plan is there talk of rotating books, but this is one way that if we do go to the drop-off method or decide to eliminate rotating service altogether, and again, that will be a full system board decision, some of that savings should go towards this, because this is the amazing, amazing service. It is so heavily used, and patrons value it as well. So like I said, before, we had eligibility just scattered all over the place, and here it really is right here in one spot before we talk about the allotments and the grants. And I've already covered that, so I'm not going to read that to you. The public library allotments, because a number of years ago, the CKLS full system board determined that the system tax is a public library tax. Only public libraries in taxing counties receive everything without charge from CKLS. So, you know, Larned is a public library and they qualify for system aid and state aid, but they're not in a taxing county, and for that reason they're not eligible for allotments and these subsidies and things like the courier subsidy, because their county tax goes towards their library. If you remember, CKLS is funded on a tax on those libraries so rural that they don't pay a local library tax. So the public library allotment for 2020, that has stayed the same. You can see that the numbers are here, they're the same. The per capita still is going off of the 2010 census. I put that information here as well to make it just real easy to see it right there. These numbers in particular haven't changed since they were established, and that was a number of years ago. I'm thinking that next year we need to take another look at these numbers, and honestly that's going to really kind of depend on where we go with rotating. I'm really loath to increase the mill levy. As you've heard throughout the rotating discussion, we have the highest mill levy, and I think that it is too high, so we need to look at cost savings funds. Every eligible public library receives $700 a year to assist with continuing education, and we do talk about how that plays out. There is the courier allotment there. The reason that I've highlighted this here is because the system, when we wrote this, it hasn't been approved yet, doesn't pay for the overages. And I think that that's something that, again, we would need to consider if we do vote to take, you know, for the system to pay the differences and the overages, this of course would come out. And then this wordage would change as well.
So Gail, when would we change this? Would we change this before the spring fling, or would we change this at the spring fling?
Well, what we could do is we would have the business meeting first, and we would do any proposals and amendments, and we can conditionally approve the system plan by removing certain language. And so then we would come back and we would remove the language and send it out to everyone that it had been approved, and then we would take it to the state library. We had to do that a number of years ago as well with a great deal of language.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we would discuss it at the May annual meeting, spring fling.
Correct.
And make changes during the meeting and then reflect those changes after the meeting.
Yes. Things that are on the ballot, like proposed changes to the system plan, proposed changes to courier subsidies, changing the number of members on the executive committee, those movements need to come from either the executive committee or the full system board. And I know that throughout our system historically, the full system board hasn't really been active in governance, and that is something that I'm working very hard on. That's why I explain these things. I talk about it. I also talk about how important it is for libraries to take part in that and take ownership in that, because you do govern the system. So
I did have a comment in the
yes.
chat, Gail. One librarian said, even if CKLS paid half of overage for the courier, that would still be
right.
So that's a a compromise. If we can't quite swing one, maybe there's another option out there.
Right, right. I know that the Great Bend Public Library will need to pay overage as well. Last year, one of the very first things we did was make some changes there. Great Bend Public Library had been part of the CKLS Courier as an indirect stop, and CKLS paid the overage for that, and we fixed that by the 1st of February. So I know that Great Bend will have overage as well, and as the library director of Great Bend, that is something that I would be very glad to see happen. So the process for Courier is here, and then we go on to grants. Grants are different than allotments. Allotments are kind of what you get for being alive and breathing. Grants are things that you apply for, and we've added some things to that. When I'm done talking about this, I want to throw an idea out that I want you to start thinking about. We're not doing it, but it is an idea that perhaps you might not have considered yet. So competitive grants are things that you apply for. We do have a major grant that we offer every year, and that runs on a 3-year cycle. That had been equipment, materials, and facilities. So this year it's equipment, materials, it's materials, things that check out at your library. And in 2020, it will be facilities. Here is the local match for that. That can come from your local fund. It can come from your capital improvement fund, from donations, fundraising. We're not real specific on how you meet that local match. It just cannot come from your CKLS allotment. When we offer the facilities grant, we offer $40,000. It talks about what's available, and it talks about the deadlines here. One of the things that we have included in this system plan, and thank you, Mary Beth, for that, is that we have included links to the forms already for reporting so that you know what to do. The annual competitive conference grant, we're still planning on funding that. That is expenses for 4 librarians to attend a national conference. That essentially is a full ride. The only thing it won't buy is souvenirs, sightseeing, and booze. It pretty much covers everything else. And here are the forms to find that out. The annual competitive continuing education grant, we will continue to fund that. In the past, I had our bookkeeper pull up the numbers, and we have never ever gotten to even $15,000 on this competitive grant. And so any monies that were left over would roll over into the general fund and into capital improvement. And that makes no sense to me, to keep throwing money at something we know isn't going to be used. So I proposed here that we reduce this from $19,000 to $15,000. If at any time we need to, we can certainly increase it again. But on the next item, the annual competitive programming grant, that had been $3,000, and it is always gone by the 1st of May, and it is gone again this year. Mm-hmm. We had doubled it. It had been $15,000 or $1,500
yeah,
for a couple of years, and it was gone by the end of January, and so we doubled it. And so I proposed then to take the money that is unused out of the competitive CE grant to throw it into a grant that is heavily used. And I know that $7,000 might last until the 1st of June. We'll have to see. But this is probably our most popular grant. Mm-hmm. If you'll remember before, I'd said that there are 3 major grants every year. It was equipment, materials, and facilities. What we do at CKLS, one of the things we do is we can field a weeding team to your library and help you weed your collection. We are in libraries a lot. We're in our public libraries and our school libraries, and we know that there is not a single library out there that couldn't use another $1,000 to boost up their materials. And this is what that proposes to do. What we're doing is we propose to pull materials out of the 3 equipment, materials, facilities cycle to pull that out. What would be really nice to add in is furnishings, because furnishings frequently aren't funded when they're as part of the equipment or the facilities grant, and we know that furnishings is something that everybody could always use help with as well. One of the things here that we do hope to require with the competitive materials grant is spending 10% of that on digital content. Right now, we probably have 5 or 6, maybe 7 libraries out of 54 public libraries who purchase digital content. It is part of the public library standards from 2016, and it will be part of the public library standards going forward. So this helps those libraries who have a very low collection budget meet that standard moving forward in the future. The easiest way for us to add that 10% on our end and so that it is used by everyone is to add it to the Sunflower eLibrary Advantage program, because all CKLS libraries then would be eligible to have that first. So as Margie asked, if a school was awarded this grant, would they give up 10%? And yes, they would as well. Any questions on that?
I don't see any in the chat, Gail.
Okay. We, of course, if this passes, we don't have the procedure checked exactly in place for that. And that is something that we would be able to cobble together and share out if this passes. There's no need for us to worry about it yet. Of course, though, your CKLS consultants have been thinking about it. The annual Storytime grant is a new addition. I'm going to go ahead and read this. I'm sure you've read it, but I want to make sure that it's clear to all of you the reasoning behind this. And so there are public library standards and there are also youth services standards. And so the 2016 Youth Services Guidelines state programming for youth is an essential part of library service. I don't think anyone would question that. Year-round programming contributes to the visibility of the library, enhances community support, lifelong learning, increases circulation. It also says programming should reflect community needs and available resources. I want to look quick and see who's here, because it looks like most of the people here are in larger, nope, there's Rami, so she counts. In some communities, it is nigh on impossible for people to get children in the community to be available for a story time. There's a number of reasons for those, but the biggest reason is not because the libraries aren't trying, but rather because the parents work out of town, the children are in school all day, or they're in daycare out of town, and they're just not in the communities anymore. When the schools close, the kids disappear. Right now, we've been working with some libraries. It's difficult for them to meet the standard of story time or family programming. And while they're all really going to try to do family programming, they're struggling with story time. And as the 2019 standard is written, if they're not able to do story time, they're going to lose 10% of their base grant. And that's quite punitive for something that they really have no control over. And so pulling story time out of the standards and offering it as a separate grant just made sense. One of the other things that, to me, as a previous children's librarian, makes a hell of a lot of sense is the funding. Before this year, Storytime was an incentive that you had to earn, and you could get up to, well, $300. It had been at $200 for a long time. But just because you did Storytime didn't mean that money would go back into Storytime. Frequently it would pay utilities or purchase adult nonfiction or whatever. With the Storytime grant, the money needs to stay with Storytime. That can be that you're going to buy books for Storytime. That $300 is a huge boost to any library, especially the small libraries, if they're going to use it to buy storytime books. It can be used for crafts and storytime books. It can be used to hire someone to do storytime in your community. There's going to be a lot of different options available for you there, but that $300 will go into storytime, which is going to be nice.
And Gail, because it's a non-competitive grant, that means that it's not a matching, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I forgot that. This right here makes me very happy. I kind of think that any grant under $1,000, it doesn't need to be a matching grant. That creates a lot of paperwork, extra paperwork, and it just doesn't need to be. And so there are some things in here that are non-local match, and that's what the non-competitive is. Thank you, Mary Beth.
And then we have a question from the chat. If a small library offers story time but no one comes, does that still count in 2019?
Yes, it does.
So we're asking them to create the opportunity to come to the library, the program. We're not asking that we can't force you to have attendance. We can't force you for that.
Exactly. This was a really, as I'll say, a very robust discussion. We talked about this extensively. We don't want a library to be punished and fall under these punitive measures, but we all very firmly believe that storytime is a critical component for any library. Library supporters and funders in the future are often those who have fond memories of storytime in summer library program. This is not to say that we don't think it's important. We really do, but we realize the reality of our local communities now. We've also added the annual advocacy grant. I talked about that very briefly, and the technology improvement grant is ongoing. In my mind, I would love to see us to be able to offer this forever. We know that we need routers. There's a bunch of things that we need, to be a modern library, and I think this is important. I'll come back to the grants in just a moment. The public library allotment standards, there have been no changes beyond the fact that now there are only 7 standards. There had been 8 standards before. Remember, we pulled storytime out, and that's why it's there. So any questions about what I've talked about so far, now's your time. And if you don't, I'm going to move on to another topic of discussion that I think is important for us to start thinking about.
We do have a question about, well, it's kind of a comment about confusion about the 2019 storytime standard. Some felt they were told differently that attendance is crucial for it to count.
Nowhere in the grant does it say that. Nowhere in the application, nowhere in the standard does it say that. It says that you have to offer it.
Okay.
If you have any questions about that, please give me a call and I'll be very glad to talk with you about it. We'd love for there to be attendance. If you're marketing well and you have children in your town and you're not having attendance, you probably need to look at when you're holding it.
But again, if there's no attendance, that's not the deciding factor on whether it counts. It's actually having the program is whether it counts.
Right. And here's the reason why. We don't want you to lie. We don't want to set up a situation where you feel you have to lie to get your funding. That benefits no one. And the numbers that you report to the state on storytime attendance, report the truth. We use those numbers and that data a lot to help drive our decisions, and we need the truthful numbers for that. Does that make sense?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, good. So I want to come back to this whole grant rigmarole and the public library allotments and the non-competitive grants and the competitive grants. And I mean, surely we could have come up with a couple more, but we didn't. That's the bulk of this system plan, this proposed and draft system plan. I'm not proposing we do it this year, but I am wanting you to start thinking about it. One of the things that other systems and CKLS, in Kansas do, and other states as well. I was just in Utah, and they do that, is they don't break it down as much as we do. They offer it as one bundle of money, and then you have standards to meet, and you choose to meet them or not, and you get all the money or you don't get any. And that is just at the absolute simplest level that I've explained it. It is really much more complex than that. In some places, the system that they set up, they call it accreditation. And in some places, darn it, I just lost a word in my head. Can't remember it. Certification. Essentially, the standards are listed there. You don't go through this process every year. You receive the money every year, but you need to prove that you are certified or accredited by submitting these things.
And then it lasts like a 3-year cycle, for example.
3-year cycle. You'll still get paid for 3 years, but you still have to do the work, and you'll still have to report on it every 3 years. It is something I'd really like for us to open the conversation on and to start thinking about. The standards, if we were to move to something like this, come straight from the public library standards and the youth services guideline standards. I think that in the future, I want to start the talk about it, but if this is something that we want to move to, I would like to see us form a committee of librarians and trustees and executive board members to start talking about this in a fruitful, positive way. I'm going to throw it out now. I'm going to throw it out at my next conversation, and I'm probably going to throw it out in May because I'll reach a different audience every time. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Or any background? Brandon, you come from a system that did that.
Right. Southwest Kansas just switched over to this model. This might be the first budget year they're actually using this model. I think it's every 2 years is what they have their set up, but yeah, you could set it up every 2 to 5 years. I think from an administrative standpoint, the smaller grants just don't make, it's just administratively on CKLS and on the individual librarian. By the time you actually put that time together, you're losing a lot of money. And
correct.
The meeting the standards and then increasing the base grant for the system base grant or the allotment or however you do that, it administratively it makes a lot more sense. Because right now, even as you were talking about, some libraries don't want hoopla. Well, some libraries don't want rotating books. Some libraries don't choose to take advantage of different services, and that puts the decision making at the local level to be able to decide which service is the most important. I've been chomping at the bit to jump in since the beginning of our conversation today, and Gail and I have talked about this already. I think this is absolutely the way to go. I think, I don't know where we're at with our rotating grants, but if the facilities is the last one in the cycle, I don't know if you have to do it on that 3-year at the end of that year, or if I don't know if that's a continuous thing forever, that it's this cycle, but I think now's the time to set our goal for after the cycle, because a lot of libraries plan for that. In Southwest Kansas, we had a technology grant that I think was every 3 years. We're like, well, I haven't taken advantage of it for 2 years because we were going to utilize it in year 3. So this obviously isn't something I think we should do for 2020, but if 2020 is the last year of our cycle, I think we need to start circling that date. And if this is something that doesn't move forward, I'll probably be advocating for it for a very long time, just because it makes sense.
And that's why I wanted to start that conversation. A lot of systems have gone this way. I had been told once upon a time that it probably wasn't, I'll say legal for lack of a better word, but my research and visiting with others shows that there is nothing that says that it is legal or illegal. It is just systems decide at the system level how to allocate funds. And that isn't even legislation. The interesting thing, this last year I did a lot of research into the deep legislative action, and the original legislation that established the systems and allowed systems to place that mill tax never said anything about returning money to the libraries. Well, at the local level with local control, no one else is better poised to decide what's best for your community. Now, with that goes a caveat that you need a well-trained librarian and a well-trained board to help steer those decisions, and that is something that we feel strongly about. It's also something I think that we are very good at and that our libraries like, and we would definitely continue with that. But at the local board level, this is something that makes sense, and it puts it forward. I don't know what that transition would look like for us. I know that in other systems who have gone to this model, they do have exceptions. So if, for example, the Storytime standard was in the accreditation or the certification, and this census showed that you just flat didn't have any kids living in your community anymore, you can apply for an exception to that. And so then you would be exempt from that.
And then there is a question in the chat. If a library feels the need to meet standards for certification, do they get no money for the next 3 years, or can a failing library be reconsidered earlier than that?
Right, and that's what it is that I don't know yet. I don't know what it looks like. This is a discussion that we all need to have, and we need to decide what's right for our system.
And there should be a waiver process for those standards.
And that's what I mean by the exemptions, yes.
Right.
Because if we said, okay, we're kicking it off in 2021, and I'm not saying that we are, I just need to say that this is, for example, if we kick it off in 2021, not everybody's going to meet the standards that year. You know, because actually in standards, it talks about how much the librarian gets paid by percentage of the budget. I think most of our libraries, the librarian doesn't make it there. They're going to need an exemption for that or a waiver until they can make that happen. Does that answer your question?
And we could modify that. We could modify those standards too for our system. If it's like 20%, it could be modified to 15% based on what we decide as a system.
That's right, exactly, because in the public library standards, it says you spend not less than 12% of your operating budget on your materials. I know there are libraries that don't do that or can't, and that is one of the things. I was in Utah, I think it was last week now. Yeah, I can't remember. It was last week or the week before that. And I was visiting with librarians there, and they go through a similar process. But what they decided at the state level, and this makes good sense to me, is that there's a percentage that we believe that 90% of our libraries will make this standard. And so that's one that you could do. There's a lot of different models out there. It is just something that I'm throwing out for my librarians to consider and for the trustees to consider, because I know that a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, I know that some people are concerned about the direction the system is going. The consultants have a wonderful relationship with librarians and with trustees, and they speak openly and candidly with us, which I think is marvelous. I really worked hard to make that happen when I was consulting as well. And part of that dialogue, because of that trusting relationship, has been, I'm a little bit concerned about where CKLS is going. Last year, I had a lot of stuff to clean up. As you know, I cleaned up a lot of things, and there's a lot of stuff that you don't know that I did as well. And I have a few things I'm still working on. So, for example, when I talked about interlibrary loan going upstairs to Great Bend, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm also talking about the fact that librarians would report that they had weeded and hoped to get their full system grant, when in reality they had not weeded. Those are also things that we had to clean up. This is taxpayers' money we're talking about, and we need to be careful with it. We do need to be good stewards of it. So last year I cleaned a lot of stuff up. Now it's time to start thinking about us as a system and as our libraries becoming future focused. I'm the director. I report to the executive board, and I report to the full system board. You all are the boss of me, and I don't think that it's my role for me to dictate to you what our future looks like. We all work for you. We are, as we say in trustee training, the librarian needs to attend board meetings because you're the technical advisor. That is a lot how I view my role, is I am your technical advisor. And unfortunately, sometimes I am the expert in the room on stuff that nobody wants to have to learn, like budget and finance and laws and stuff. But that is also what you pay me for. But I want I really want everybody to start to understand that the full system board is a governing board. It is a working and a governing board. And together, we decide the direction that we're going to go. You'll hear me say that a lot, and I'll probably be doing this, or we'll do it together, because it really is very important to me. It's very important. And I know that's new and a little bit scary, but I'm not going to make a big decision without consulting with the members. As we talked about in the RB design webinars, in years past, this decision would never have gone to anybody. It would have been made and done. No one would have had any say-so. And I want the board, the full system board I'm talking about, to really start taking ownership of the system.
So Gail, your goal for next year, for 2020, is to reduce the mill rate, because we're to a certain, I don't even know what numbers or anything, but you've kind of explained the situation. We amped it up. It was never readjusted.
Right. We've got a lot of money in capital improvement, and for an organization that has a very small fleet of vehicles, office furniture, and technology, that's way too much money in there.
And then, so beyond that, so 2021, you don't want to just turn around and
jack it up again,
or even slowly, incrementally jack it up. Or jack it up's like the opposite of what I mean. It's more like, like leak a little bit, and then like just.
If there's a need for it, absolutely we would. Okay. There is always that. We can do that if there's a need for it. Right now, there isn't. One of the other things, so I still have about 4 minutes, so I'll talk about this quickly. When I was in Utah and Patty Collins was there, Margie and Mary Beth are going to do it in Virginia. We went to, it's called a RIPL event, RIPL, Research Institute for Public Libraries. And what you learned there is how to collect data using a variety of different tools, publish it visually, and then make decisions that are driven by that data. And so part of that for us is going to be starting the strategic planning process. We'd done that before, but it was kind of one and done. We haven't ever touched it up. It's time to do that, and hopefully through that process, we're going to get some real goals to help us focus future forward. And I think then that will also help us decide where we are with our system plan. You know, if the goal is that we put double the amount of money into digital content, for example, we'll need to adjust the budget, just like you adjust your local library budget to suit what you need locally. Does that help, Brandon?
Yes. And I guess now's the time to throw that, but you talked about the population allotment and exploring that.
Yes.
Why is that something that can be explored this year, or is that you said in the future we would explore that?
We could, certainly we could. And that is something then that we could spend down some of that capital improvement with. But right now, yes, we could. That's just what I'll say. Yes, we could.
Okay.
And I can do that. I mean, if people want me to do that, I can look at that for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I know we've talked about discussions of the arrangements between some of the larger libraries.
Yes.
And then the history of, we had the data link fund, or the processing fund.
Right.
You want to call it.
So I can give some background on that. We might go a little bit over, so if you need to leave, go ahead. But I think this is important as well. CKLS traditionally has not been able to offer, I mean, we've offered services, but the big libraries haven't taken advantage of them because they're beyond that point. So for the big libraries, the best thing that CKLS has been able to offer is money. The per capita grant came about because a couple of Salina directors ago said, hey, listen, Salina puts in so much money into the system and we're not getting a lot back. And so the per capita grant sort of put a Band-Aid on that. Like I said, last year I dove deep into legislation, and the legislation is pretty clear that you can't say, okay, Lincoln County, you give more money, we're going to give more money back to you. It kind of has to be equitable. The per capita grant is a kind of a way around that. That also puts money in those smallest communities as well. So that is something that we can play with and adjust for the numbers as well.
And I think even extending back that data link grant is, or I don't want to call, I'm not going to call it a grant. I'm going to call it.
We don't, at this point, we don't even know what that thing is for. I think it is because Hayes and Salina process and catalog their own books.
Yeah, I've found some notes from Melanie Miller, who was the director in the 80s, and it was just that that they weren't taking advantage of those services, like you just said earlier. We're beyond that to send materials down, and that many materials, it was inundating the whole system. So this was in 1990, whenever the first $15,000. Now, something I'm going to be talking a lot about with Gail and the system board is $15,000 in 1990. Is $30,000
that grant cost
now.
has never increased, and that's a problem because everybody, if you look back at what you got from the system, the data link grant aside, in the 90s, you could well have doubled by what you get the system.
It should be about $30,000 now. And I'm not saying this at this conversation to pirate this discussion.
Sure.
But my guess, the reason I'm interjecting this is that for the 2020 budget, if we don't talk about this now, then we're not talking about this.
Right. And what we usually do, Brandon, just so you know, is we kind of get a good feel for the system plan. After this second meeting, we'll really know if we need to make changes or not. We made some tweaks and changes last year based on the conversation around this. And then we build the budget to the plan, of course. And that is something that we can definitely do. Where are we meeting? Next month is April, right?
Next month is April.
And that's close to Salina. On April 17th, Brandon, if you want to go to the CK executive meeting and bring this up, then that would be awesome. You could drive here and we could ride with you the rest of the way or wherever. It's just to the south of Salina.
Okay, it's on a Wednesday.
Because that's something that should come.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll put that on my calendar.
Okay. I would say our next meeting is Wednesday, March 20th, and it'll be in the afternoon. We're going to discuss this again, and if we make any changes, of course, go over those changes that we've talked about today. And then if there's any more questions to go with, I think Gail lost connection. I think that's what happened. So just a second, she's on the phone. This is Mary Beth. Okay, so I guess we're done for the day. Okay, thank you. Bye. Okay, so Gail got disconnected. So we're going to call that the end of the meeting today. If you have any more questions, you can email them to it. You can email to the CKLS Google group so everybody can see it, or you can email it to us privately. I have been recording this workshop, so we will be posting it by the end of the day, so everybody will have access to it. I'll also have links to the draft of the system plan and the courier budget, which we also talked about today. Unless there's any more questions, I think we will call it the end of the meeting. Okay, I see people are leaving, so thank you very much. Have a good day.